there are a lot of researches going on. One Dr. Johnson, some years ago, he wrote, after studying 20 cases of near-death experiences, and most of them all related to some religious experiences. What they experience as the other world or life after death, very often is related to their own religious experiences or the religious teachings. So this short video will help us to understand the talk that is forthcoming. So thank you. Now Joseph will play that video.
So one day I was out riding and I had an accident and I slammed into a tree. And the way I landed, I tore the tendons off my right hand, and I had to go in to have surgery, start to pump in the anesthesia. And I had some kind of an allergic reaction, and it stopped my heart, and I died. Well, the very second that I died, I opened my eyes again, and I was standing in the most beautiful building I had ever seen. And my very first thought was, oh my God, I had no idea the hospital was this big. Because the building that I was in, it was a long corridor building. And I couldn't see the end of it. It was so long. And there were columns on the right-hand side, marble, beautiful white marble columns, maybe 30 feet high, all the way down as far that we only are like, or energy that we float around. But that's not what my experience was like. I saw everybody just like you see people. They look just like us. Their bodies are different. Their bodies are somehow, they're better than our earthly bodies. They're stronger. They're lighter. They don't get sick. They don't age. And I don't know what they're made of, but they are as solid as we are. So I saw them walking back and forth. And one of the most beautiful things I saw was there was a lake on the other side of this building. It was absolutely the most beautiful lake I'd ever seen. It was so still, it looked like glass. And all around this lake, they had weeping willow trees. You know those trees that have the weeping willows that hang over? All the leaves were just sitting in the water. I was told everything that's on the earth now was on the other side first. The idea of the pyramids was from the other side. The idea of these beautiful Greek Roman buildings, the architecture is so beautiful that the inspiration came from the other side. It was over there first. And it came, and I'll mention that to you in a couple of minutes. Something else that happened.
Okay.
So that was the library. Here's the part that I think will answer your question better. He took me to, they were built out of stone, beautiful, gorgeous stone that was perfectly cut, just like the castles were back then, huge. And he told me to walk inside. So I walked inside, and immediately there was a gorgeous red ornate carpet on the floor of kings and queens and people of royalty who had lived in that castle. And there were life-size paintings of what they looked like and also what they wore. And in front of every single painting, there was a podium. And on the podium was a book. And what it was that person's life was in that book. And the reason this castle existed, and there were many, many castles there, because they were on Earth. So what was on Earth is also replicated on the other side. And so if you wanted to learn
to perform in one way, shape, or form, but we have the ability on the other side to tap into any information we might want or need to or are interested in. Kind of like, quantum physics. Oh, here's quantum physics, and explain everything to you. And you'll go, oh.
And I could see his hair. He had brown hair. I could see his hands. I could see that he was wearing a white robe or a white tunic with a golden sash around the waist. And he had gold-colored sandals on that laced up his calves. And he was different than everybody else, because I couldn't see his face. There was so much light or energy coming from him that I couldn't make out what he looked like. And my mind said to me, or somebody said to me, this is Jesus. And he spoke to me and he said, you must be down at me. You know how they look at you when you're, well, what happened to this guy? And I said to the surgeon, I said, what just happened? Because I was trying to see if he could explain to me where I was, what just happened to me. And that's when I found out that I died. He said, we lost you. We lost you for 7 minutes. And I found the kind of hope that it gave me that there was so much more. God really exists. He really and truly loves us. And here's something else that I don't know how to explain either. On the other side, there absolutely is a God. And the Native Americans call him the Great Spirit. And I think that's how I would define it too. He's absolutely there. We were all created by God in one spark of creation. So he's definitely there. And God is the only emotion that I can really explain is that he is all love. God is all love. And he wants the best for us. And he created the other side, our home, with an absolute paradise, but also created the whole dynamic of being able to come into a lifetime and to experience things that you can't experience on the other side. So he's all about love, all about experience, all about learning. And he's just this ever-present. And on the other side, you feel this tremendous sense of love and safety and peace. That's why it was so hard for me to come back from that, because I wanted to be back there. I didn't want to be here anymore. But I got the sense that I had to share my story because of what they told me. But that's how I would define God, just a beautiful entity that is truly our Father.
And what is the ultimate purpose of life?
I think the ultimate purpose of life is to count, to stand for something, to develop your gift, because I truly believe that God gave us all gifts, and that our job is to develop those gifts and then give it away. I always think of Pablo Picasso, the artist. He said something that I've never forgotten. He said, the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. So I think just based on that, I agree with them 100%. Find your gift, develop it, share it with the world, and make the world a better place for you having been in it.
And do you have any parting messages for the audience?
I think the biggest thing I want people to take away is that there is tremendous, tremendous hope. No matter how hard your life gets, no matter how many experiences you have, and even when you think that you've reached the end of your rope, just tie a knot and hold on, because it's going to get better. It always gets better. And let the knowledge of God and the other side give you strength, give you courage to keep plugging along. Because when you finish this lifetime and you get back, it's like surviving a war. And you will be so proud of yourself for what you accomplished and what you achieved. So stick it out. Don't give up. Give it everything you've got. And the hope is just boundless. There was a quote that I like too by Admiral William McRaven. You've probably heard of him. And he said, hope is the belief that tomorrow is going to be better. And it will be. And knowing about the other side, knowing about how beautiful it is, that's our home, that will give you courage to keep facing each and every day and moving forward.
And on that note, my friend,
for the sake of friends who joined us a little later, that video was on near-death experience, NDE. And there are many cases where they almost reached death point and came back. This particular man was dead for 7 minutes. So the doctors told him, we lost you for 7 minutes. During those 7 minutes, he was explaining how he experienced, and he saw a figure that must be Jesus and all. Sometimes people raise question, do the non-believers, atheists, do they also have near-death experience? And those who don't believe in life after death, what kind of experience they have? It's a quite interesting area to explore into. I know a priest who was invited to give the final extreme unction, no, sacrament. So he went there. Just before that, the man who was on the deathbed, he was asking his wife, because wife was crying too much, ask her to go away because he's delaying my going to heaven. I see a lot of angels waiting there with bright light, with the flowers, things like that. If she cries too much, she will delay my going. Then someone said, the father is coming to give the sacramental. Let him come, he will help me to go faster, he said. I don't know what he meant. Anyway, so the point is, very often they have, like that, many experiences. A lady came to see his brother who was dying from Australia. And in between, he got the death experience, some few moments away. And when she came, he said, I saw you getting into the flight. I saw you, this is the airlines you travel. I saw you, the food, this is the food they served you. And she was surprised. And she didn't tell anyone, just reached there and he was narrating that. So these are all near-death experience, how this consciousness is involved, subconscious or no. So it's a big question. So this, I think, sets the right stage for a further discussion today by a speaker, Dr. Ashish, with us on consciousness, mind-body relationship, and psychosomatic aspects of life. So over to our Vijay Pooty for official beginning of the program. Yes. Thank you. And this video will be available in our group. In case you are interested, you can have a look at it later. Yeah.
The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. Albert Einstein. Good evening, dear sisters, fathers, and brothers. It gives me immense pleasure to extend to you a very warm welcome to the second day of annual seminar on the mysteries and the world of science. And the topic for today's presentation is From Biosciences to Consciousness, Psychosomatics and Faith Healing. We are thrilled to have you here all. Let us discover something new in this session. Prayer is the key to the heart of God. Let us begin with a moment of devotion. Please join us in prayer as we play this video.
All to Jesus I surrender. To Him I freely give. I will ever love and trust Him in His presence daily live. I surrender. I surrender all to Thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all to Jesus. I surrender. Humbly at His feet I bow. Worldly pleasures all forsaken. Take me, Jesus, take me now. I my blessed Savior, I surrender.
Today, we feel honored to have with us the esteemed speaker, Dr. Scholastic Ashish Rodricks, MD. Let us welcome him with a warm applause. Now, I call upon Father Ronald, the Rector of Papal Seminary, to felicitate our speaker with a shawl and memento. Thank you, dear Father. We are also privileged to have Brother Nirmal Savio Paul, the moderator of the day. Brother Nirmal Savio Paul belongs to the Diocese of Kotar in Tamil Nadu. At present, he is in the first year STB, staying at Papal Seminary. He has worked as an embedded system engineer prior to joining the seminary. He has completed MTech from NIELIT Calicut. Earlier, he did his BE ECE Electronic and Communication Engineering from MIT Chennai. He is a very apt person to moderate this session. Let us welcome him with a round of applause. Now I call upon Father Youngerson to felicitate our moderator with a memento. Thank you, dear Father. Now I invite moderator to take over the session.
Respected fathers, Reverend sisters, my dear brothers. It is my immense pleasure to introduce the resource person of the day, Dr. Scholastic Ashish Rodricks, MD. He is going to enlighten us on the progression from biosciences to consciousness. Dr. Ashish completed his MBBS in 1997 and his MD in 2002 from St. John's Medical College, Bangalore, following which he worked as a lecturer in the same college. In 2003, he was a joint consultant at the Christian Fellowship Hospital at Ottanchitram, Dindigul District, Tamil Nadu in 2004. From 2005 to 2009, he served as a lecturer and then as an assistant professor at CMC Vellore. Following this, he worked as a consultant at the North Goa District Hospital from 2011 to 2012. After practicing privately as a consultant physician in Goa, he joined the Society of Jesus in 2023. Let us welcome Dr. Scholastic Ashish Rodricks and give him a patient hearing.
Good evening, Father Roland, Rector at Papal Seminary, our JD faculty, and religious priests and friends. So I'd like to thank Father Stephen first for giving me this opportunity here to speak today, and I shall be speaking on these following topics. So we'll begin with the first basic perennial question, which is, what is life? So there has been a lot of research, advanced research and discoveries in the field of biology, medical sciences, and this has revealed how complex the human body is and how intricate the functioning of the human body is. So life is the capacity for growth, reproduction, functional activity, and a continual change. So it is the ability to move, to eat, to be able to procreate, which are all signs of life. But what is life? Biosciences tends to reduce all these biological entities like cells to just atoms and molecules. But the human body is not just physical structure of tissues and cells and molecules. So this is what a reductionist view of life would be. So for them, life is just a sum of biological reactions. Consciousness is just brain activity, and it does not explain what the meaning of life is or what first-person subjective experiences are. And so we need a holistic view of life, and that emerges when components are organized together in a very specific, dynamic, and self-regulating systems. So as I'll show you in the next slide, so we have the individual basic fundamental unit, which is the cells, and then these form tissues, organs, and then systems. So in this slide, if you look at, this is the heart muscle cell, and then a number of it together will form the tissue, and then we have the heart muscle cells, the tissue forms the heart, and then this is part of a system, which is the circulatory system or the cardiovascular system. And we have many other systems also in the human body, and together this is what forms the human body. So what is the notion of life? It actually fills us with awe and wonder, and it cannot be looked at in isolation as just the body, the spirit, or the soul, and it's not just a sum of the parts like the reductionist view, and function is not explained just by physical, mechanical laws. And so it cannot, the body, human body also cannot be reduced to just fundamental phenomena. Now, can lifeless components, the basic building blocks of the human body, together make life possible? So from a scientific perspective, the human body is made of number of non-living components by themselves. So we have atoms, molecules, all the basic building blocks, including DNA, protein molecules, etc. So these form matter which has potential for living. These are necessary, they are essential, but they are not sufficient causes for life. And just a random assembly of all these chemicals does not produce life. So what brings about this transition from non-life to life? Is life So can we find life isolated in the bones or just the genes or the cells of the body or any of the organs of the body, the chromosomes, or even in frozen sperms, because we know now they have sperm banks as well, and then years later then they are being used to produce life. And so this is a difficult question, and this is referred to as the hard problem of biogenesis, which we don't have real clear straightforward answers to these questions. Another issue is about viruses. So are viruses living beings or non-living? And the points in favor of the non-living beings is that they require a cell to infect, and only then are they able to multiply. So that's the word we use. We call them obligate intracellular parasites. By themselves, they have potential for life, but they do not have a cell structure of their own or a metabolism of their own. And this is the structure of the HIV virus. So you can only see the envelope around the virus, and inside is no clear nucleus like you would see in other living cells. But we see nuclear material, that is the RNA strands that we can see inside the virus. The points in favor of them being living beings would be that they need a host to complete the life cycle. And so only when they infect the cell, which is the human cell, they are able to replicate and multiply and then destroy the human body, and we know even death. And so this brings about a change in our thinking. And so over the years, then this came this trend of systems thinking. And so the same applies with biology and life. And so there is system biology. And this focuses on the holistic and composite nature of the human body. And the focus is not just on the body, but the focus is on the person. And so we have the person with his background, cultural background, lifestyle, number of comorbidities, and not just one disease. Another aspect is the dynamic stability. So it's not static. Our heart rate is not the same throughout the day. So it will vary depending on what activity we do. When we sleep, the heart rate goes down. When we exercise, it is a normal requirement for the body, and so the heart rate will go up. Even the diagnostic methods that we may use need to be looked at in a holistic manner. So we don't look at only one blood sugar value and diagnose a person with having diabetes. So what is life or living? So living would mean existence of the human being. And we have complex diseases which cannot be explained with just a single factor, a single cause. So cancer is not just explained with just one single genetic mutation, but it is multiple causes. So we say multifactorial, including the environment, which also plays a role here. And so we can look at the body as an organic system, which is where every part is interlinked. And there is higher levels of organization and complexity. For example, our consciousness, which we will see. And a greater relationship also between the parts, as I mentioned, and here more specifically between the mind and body, which is the consciousness and brain, which we will look at. So the scientific revolution really changed our understanding of humanity. So it began to be understood as just being the body, and the body being reduced to just some function of the body. And then came in neuroscience, and then from our earlier understanding of the human person as a spiritual soul, now it became just a physical organ where everything can be explained by biology and physics. As the body also evolved, as through the process of evolution, the brain also evolved, and with that our mind. And the mind also has been reduced to just what the brain does. So we'll briefly look at the architecture of the mind and its relation to our consciousness and the self. So we can imagine the mind as a big theater, and the consciousness is a stage on which the person who is the self, represents the self, is acting out in this ongoing drama. And the unconscious is the massive, unseen, behind the scenes machinery, which makes the performance possible. So this is a diagrammatic representation of the architecture of the mind. So we have the person here, which is the self, which is acting out on the stage, which is the consciousness. And the backstage represents the unconscious mind. Just a brief recap of the different lobes of the brain. So we have the frontal lobe, we have the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe, and with their respective functions. But more importantly here, we would need to look at the frontal lobe, which is like the CEO of the body. So all the executive functions, the higher mental functions, the cognitive functions we will refer to, happen over here in the frontal lobe. Then we have the parietal lobe, so where a number of the sensations from the body reach here, and this is important in understanding consciousness. We have the temporal lobe, where all the auditory stimuli would reach over here, and then we have the occipital lobe, where all our visual perception would reach. And if you look at the junction of these lobes here, this is now it's referred to as a general interpretive area, or even beyond that is a higher association area, where all these are integrated. So we have the sensations from the parietal lobe, the sensations from the auditory stimuli, visual stimuli, which are then interpreted over here. This would then be linked here to the frontal lobe as well, so that the body can then take the next action through movement, which is controlled over here, which is the motor system of the body. So with that background now, let us try to understand the neural correlates of consciousness. So can our consciousness just be explained by just the nerves in our brain? And so these represent just the minimal nerve networks that are required for our consciousness. And as I was showing you, these primary sensory areas, so the main sensations of our body, which reach the parietal lobe, as I showed you. And then we have the higher association areas, so where all the integration and the interpretation of these sensory perceptions take place. And that is very crucial for conscious awareness. So there are certain theories to explain this relationship between the brain and our consciousness. And one of them is this global workspace theory. Again, it summarizes what I was explaining. So you have all the information, which is our audience systems, like the theater analogy I gave you. So the audience is all the sensory perceptions, our memory, language, attention, which reaches this area here, where all the information is processed. And from here, then it also goes to the entire brain. There are electrical impulses which would then go to the entire brain, and that's why it's called a global workspace theory. So there is a synchronized firing of all these neurons, which is across distant brain regions. So as I was saying, so from here, then the entire brain would then get activated. More specifically, as I was showing you in the frontal and the parietal network. So the frontal lobe here and the parietal lobe over here. And so our consciousness correlates with a lot of activation in these areas. Again, continuing with it. So this again, it shows you how the entire brain, which is the cerebrum. So the major portion is called the cerebrum, and the lower portion is called the brainstem, and behind we have the cerebellum. So here you can see how the entire brain is getting activated here, and this is through a particular system which is called the reticular activating system. So you can see a bundle of nerve cells over here, which is in the brainstem, lower part of the brain, and then this is continuously synchronized, firing electrical activity to stimulate the global brain. And so this is also responsible for alertness. So as I showed you in the picture also, so these are projections, ascending projections to the cortex, which refers to the outer portion, outer layer of the brain, and that maintains the consciousness or the wakeful state of the person. And that is required to maintain alertness, the coherence of our thought, and responsiveness. And then we will see what happens if this does not happen. And so then there would be an impairment in the level of consciousness. So slowly the person would become drowsy, so like a sleepy state, then going on to a stuporous state, where even vigorous stimuli also are required then to wake the person up, but he falls back to sleep. and then the last stage would be going into coma, which is a deep sleep-like state, and they cannot be aroused with any stimuli. And so all these normal functions that a person would then be normally able to do would then gradually fall, and this is then when we call it coma, when all these global functions are not possible. So we will come to also in faith and healing about the recovery from coma. So it's difficult to predict now how and when the person is going to recover from coma. So most of the patients, they recover within a year's time, but if they do not, then the chances of recovery from what has been observed from patterns of recovery, the chances of recovery would be less after a year. But then we hear of unusual cases of how persons wake up after many years, 10 years, 12 years, or maybe even longer. So these are very interesting experiences and facts, which is also well documented. And this is where then the mystery of science and medical science comes in. So if you look at the self, so where is the self in the brain? And so then now that is like moving from metaphysics. So we would talk of it only in terms of metaphysics. But now if we try to reduce that to just the biology, so we would say that the soul or the self now is just replaced by the central nervous system or by just the nerves. And so it's just now explained by the physical state of the brain and just ongoing neural activity of the nerves and networks in the brain. So this concept of a single unified self also came from experiments which they did when the connections between the two hemispheres of the brain, there are nerve connections between the two. And if for some reason or experimental reasons in animals which were performed, and that was dissected and the two halves of the brain were separated, they found that each hemisphere still had their own beliefs, desires, responses. And so that brought in this concept of the single unified self or the constructed self. So the core consciousness where I is the main person is the self-awareness. And the narrative self becomes our extended consciousness, which refers to our past history, like an autobiographical self, our beliefs, our ideologies, our ambitions. And so now we'll try to understand the neurological basis for this. And so this is referred to as the default mode network, okay, where it is a neurological network which is referring to the self or the person I. And so this is some of the components of the network. So we have this area here and this portion over here, which represents it. And in the next slide, I'll show you another. And so this happens now, this comes into activity when we are not focusing on the work that we are doing. And so then we are lost in our thoughts, either the past, the future, and maybe about others as well. And so this is the network which is actually running when we are not focused on what we are doing. So this is the other component which is on the inner side of the brain and which is called the pre-genius. And so in here, this is more of the self-awareness. The first one, which was the medial prefrontal cortex, is about identity, and most of our self-referential thought is there. And the other one is the posterior cingulate cortex, is more specifically the autobiographical memory. So now that we've understood this, now let us try to understand these near-death experiences, like the video that you were watching before this talk began. And so we need to understand something about the neuroscience of dying. So a doctor would declare a person who is dead clinically by the bedside when they see that the heart is stopped beating, person is not breathing. They would see that there's no response to any stimuli. They would look at the eyes and they look at pupils to see whether there is any reaction over there. And so when there is no reaction there, as well as some other basic reflexes of the brain which we look for, we then say and declare the person dead. So that is the clinical death. beyond that, now what's more interesting, and this is the first time now I'm talking about people after death. I've been used to talking about people to keep them alive, and now this is the first talk that I'm actually talking about what happens to them after death. And so that's near death. And why does this happen? They have a number of these experiences. So we'll just go through these experiences to begin with, and we'll see why. Is feelings of peace, these out-of-body sensations. So you can see the person lifted up, they feel lifted up from the bed, or moving through a tunnel with light at the end of it, and then encountering beings like the person in the video also mentioned about meeting Jesus. And some of them, it is reviewing their entire life. So this is explained now by this dying brain hypothesis. So they bring in the neurobiological processes to explain this. So to understand this, we need to also understand that even after the person is clinically dead, like I said, after the heart has stopped, it takes some more minutes, maybe 3 to 4 minutes, for the blood supply to the brain to stop completely. That is why we look at that window, that 3 to 4 minute window, when we try to revive a person who has died or resuscitate the person. So that's where then CPR or cardiopulmonary resuscitation comes in. So within that short window period of 3 to 4 minutes is when we can revive a person. And that's why we have even these defibrillators, automatic defibrillators now, even at public places like international airports. And I saw some at the railway station in Bombay also. So because that initial few minutes is like a golden window, a golden period and a window when you can bring the person back to life. But what happens beyond that? So once that window is closed, so after the initial 3 to 4 minutes, the blood flow to the brain would stop, and then the blood flow takes oxygen. So that means then oxygen is now deprived to the brain. So the brain function is going to shut down. And so that would happen within or beyond these 3 to 4 minutes. Also, because if we do resuscitate a patient after these 3 to 4 minutes, there will be some damage to the brain that we will see later on. Okay, so it could vary. It could be like just being like in a coma state, or maybe he loses memory. So these are certain subtle residual damage that we can see if we don't resuscitate in time. Then the next is to explain this phenomena that I described to you, is that the visual cortex, or that visual area which I showed you in the occipital lobe, there's a gradual shutdown, and so it shuts down from the periphery to the center, and so they see only a tunnel of vision, and so that could explain the tunnel of light that they see, light at the end of the tunnel that they see. And then the review of their entire life, again, it's because they may have a heightened sense of perception and sensation, with release of a lot of memories from different parts in the brain. So these are the theories that have been put forward to explain these phenomena. And the out-of-body experiences also, as I showed you, that the areas which are involved there, where all our sensory experiences are integrated, they explain it with some dysfunction at that junction, and that creates the out-of-body sensation. And the feeling of profound peace is because of a number of the neurochemicals that are produced, like endorphins, during extreme stress. That happens even in normal life as well, but here it would be much greater. And then there is a final massive wave of electrical activity which spreads throughout the brain. This is almost like the last breath, we could say, but this is the last electrical wave that is seen in the brain and called the wave of death. So we'll just listen to a short video, which is a doctor who is explaining some of these phenomena and his experience also.
Like lack of oxygen, drugs given to the people, and so forth, don't pan out. The data do not support them. And furthermore, the phenomena of NDEs, of near-death experiences, seem to defy a simple materialistic explanation. I'm Bruce Grayson. I'm a professor emeritus of psychiatry and neurobehavioral sciences at the University of Virginia Medical School. And our experiences are profound subjective experiences that many people have when they come close to death, or sometimes when they are in fact pronounced dead. And they include such difficult to explain phenomena as a sense of leaving the physical body, reviewing one's entire life, encountering some other entities that aren't physically present, and at some point coming to a point of no return beyond which they come back to life. When they return, they often are profoundly changed by this experience. She was still unconscious. When I went to see her in the morning, I introduced myself, and she stopped me and said, "I know who you are. I remember you from last night." That puzzled me, so I said something like, "Well, I'm surprised. I thought you were unconscious when I saw you last night." And she looked at me and said, "Not in my room. I saw you talking to my roommate down the hall." She sensed my confusion and started to tell me about the conversation I had with her roommate, where we were sitting, what we were talking about, and finally she said, "And you had a striped tie on with a red stain on it." That just blew me away. I didn't know how to deal with that. I couldn't think of any logical reason, any explanation for how she could have known about that spaghetti stain. Nobody had seen it except her roommate, and she hadn't talked to her roommate since she came into the hospital and put it behind me. I collected about 1,000 cases that people had sent to me about their own near-death experiences. Quickly realized that however, that's not the whole story. And we have hundreds and hundreds of experiences that occur during a cardiac arrest or deep anesthesia when we know the brain is not capable of functioning well enough to create complex thoughts and feelings and memories. Most near-death experiencers say that in the near-death experience, their senses were incredibly heightened. And they'll talk about encountering a warm, loving being of light that radiates unconditional love to her. Hold out the promise that will explain to us what the soul is, whether there is an afterlife after our bodies decompose. I think
Yeah, so the cardiac arrest he is referring to is what I mentioned. So that refers to the heart completely stopping. And with that, then the breathing also comes to a halt. So how do we relate now the consciousness and these near-death experiences? So what happens to the consciousness? If it is just neurological, what happens to the consciousness in these near-death experiences? And so this brings us to this, the boundary of life and death, which is quite blurred. And as I was explaining to you that time window that we have to resuscitate a patient, because the heart, the consciousness may not completely cease or stop when the heart stops. As I said, the brain blood flow may still be continuing for some time, but slowing down. And maybe that window is when the consciousness can persist. But what I cannot explain also would be, longer than that. Longer than 7 minutes or 10 minutes would be difficult to explain. And so then it really challenges our understanding of the consciousness and its relation to just the physical brain. We have the other explanation, which is called panpsychism, so where our consciousness is interconnected. And so we have consciousness being a fundamental property of matter in the universe. And so this interconnectedness could be one of the explanations. And so there is a neurological view, and so from the neurological view, they try to explain all this, as I already mentioned, the near-death experiences from a neurological point. So could these just be hallucinations? Because there are these anesthetic drugs also which could induce hallucinations. They could induce the reactions, like he said, reactions in terms of sometimes they may cause an abnormal heartbeat, and then that may cause the heart to stop. So that probably was one of the reasons in this particular case. Then, as I already explained, so this is just some biochemical processes that are going on under stress. And then materialism would say that our consciousness then will end with death. But on the other side, then we have a spiritual view. And so that brings in metaphysics. And so where they do have belief and this knowledge of afterlife, and perception happens without any sensory inputs here. How do we explain the detachment of self from the body? Does the soul persist beyond the death of the body, as this doctor also mentioned here? Then that also brings in the question of dualism. So as Descartes also talks about the mind separate from the body. But a number of these experiences, as you've heard also, the individual says that these are life-changing experiences. Okay? And so then it gives them new values. They are detached from materialism. It brings in spirituality. Then they describe these as very meaningful experiences, and they cannot be reduced to just physical explanations, which would be with phenomenology. But there is a focus here on the self-transformation that it brings about. So it brings about a change in their meaning and their attitude to life. And from an existentialist point of view, then who believe that death is the end, here now they're confronted with the possibility of afterlife. And we have in Indian philosophy also this universal, one of the universal spiritual truths, which is the belief in the consciousness even beyond death, in the afterlife. So what would it mean then to be human? And as the first video before the beginning of the talk also referred to, that quantum physics would be one of the explanations here to explain these phenomena. And yesterday's talk also we heard some of it related to the dreaming state, but here now we could apply this to these near-death experiences as well. We'll move on to another topic which is related also, and that is extrasensory perception. And so this is referred to as the ability to receive information beyond our normal 5 senses that we have. So that is apart from only the sight, hearing, touch, smell. Is there a 6th sense, which we would normally refer to as intuition? And so some of the forms here are telepathy. So, we've only read this in books, fiction books, where there may be a communication of thoughts between people. Clairvoyance, which is the awareness of hidden objects. Knowing something beforehand, so precognition, which is the knowledge of future events even before they occur. Or retrocognition, which is knowledge of past events, when the person has not really been there. Okay, so it is not learned through ordinary means. And some of these experiences have been related to the life in the womb. And so then the person actually has the full information, sensory information about the place that the mother had been to while the person was in the womb, and has never been there after birth. And so these are some very interesting facts over here, and some of these pictures also highlight some of the same. Then remote viewing, where they are able to view things at a distance. And so how does neuroscience explain this? So is this just the ability of the brain to anticipate some sensory experiences based on the memory of past experiences? But we know that that is not always possible. Is the brain making some predictions unconsciously? Is it retrieving some patterns which is from memory unconsciously, when actually there is nothing? Like I explained to you, some of the memories even from intrauterine existence. And understanding others' emotions, and called a biological empathy. In fact, I remember our Soshis in the novitiate who would tell us about how when he was here in DNC, was then admitted in the hospital and he needed to be operated. And his mother calls up and says, something is wrong. What is wrong with you? And so this is the kind of biological empathy which goes beyond the normal sensory explanation. And the concept of mirror neurons, so which is almost like mind reading of the other person. They may try to explain this with some activity in the temporal lobe, which typically causes hallucinations. So they may hear voices, they may see things. This deja vu, so already seen before kind of feeling. And these feelings of supernatural presences, which may not always explain everything. So the points which would favor this extrasensory perception. So here is consciousness, which is now accessing information without any sensory input. They hold on to the anecdotal evidence, where dreams that are predicting events that happen, and even sensing someone's presence. And this usually is linked to a cultural belief and the spiritual belief. But the points against it is that some of these are very subjective, very difficult to verify, and they may be error prone. They may say it is just chance. Science will ask for proof to reproduce the extrasensory perception. So they may just put it down to superstition and say it is not supernatural. So how would we relate then the consciousness to this extrasensory perceptions? So it's a real challenge then, because then the awareness is we believe that the awareness is restricted only to the present moment, and that our awareness is not bound by time in a linear fashion. So which means that now we are saying that our awareness, our consciousness is able to transcend time. From an existentialist perspective, then it would provide them with some hope and comfort that yes, so there is the possibility of continuity of life after death. And whether it is real or not, but it is a real challenge to the boundary of our sensory perception and consciousness. So we'll move on to the next topic, which is psychosomatics. And here again, we'll look at another mind-body relationship. So what do we refer to this broad category of psychosomatic diseases? So these are medically unexplained symptoms after adequately investigating them. So we do not just label them as unexplained, only after adequate investigation. And any symptom also could be put into this kind of a category. People have their own understanding of the disease, their belief about a disease. There is usually an associated anxiety, depression. They are excessively concerned, and they keep on seeking medical care very frequently. And if we were to ask them, then this would reveal some previous experience that they've had. And so one of the common experiences would be somebody in the family or their own past experience of which has not been a very pleasant one, and then that creates a lot of anxiety, which leads to these symptoms, even when after investigating we are not able to find and diagnose a particular disease. And one of the typical examples of this is the irritable bowel syndrome. So this refers to a disorder of the stomach, the gut. And so there are symptoms of pain, sometimes diarrhea, sometimes constipation. And these are in a broad category called functional somatic. Somatic refers to the body, or the functional somatic syndrome. And in spite of a number of tests being done, doctors are not able to prove any abnormality in the structure of the gut. And so then it is then labeled as some problem with the function, which means the movement of the gut, the motility of the gut, which may explain why the person is having then frequent motion, which is diarrhea or constipation. And so this brings us to the relationship between the mind and the body. And this is just one example in the body. The gut is a typical example. And a number of us would have also experienced this, also in relation to the heart as well, because the same nerves also go to the heart. So we know with anxiety, then we have palpitations and maybe even sweating. And so you can see the number of interactions here. This is the nerve pathway by which they are related. And there are so many other factors which are then playing a role here in causing the symptoms of this particular disease. The next is also what is called the placebo effect. Okay, so this basically it refers to a substance or sometimes even a procedure. They may even undergo an operation also, like appendectomy for what they suspect, and appendicitis because the person complains of pain. And it may seem like it is appendicitis, and earlier when no scans were available, they may have operated as well. And after this, the person improves even without having any problem with his appendix. So it is a substance or even this kind of a procedure which brings about an improvement without any specific activity in the medication that is being given. And so we could refer to them as just fast medical treatment, and some of them is just like giving vitamins, beautifully colored vitamins, which then have a beneficial effect on the patient. And so it is the expectation of the patient that makes him feel better. So this could be tablets, could be injections, could be even taking saline drips, glucose drips, or even an operation, as I mentioned. So the cultural background also has a positive influence over here, and the basic positive or the confidence it builds up in the person is the placebo effect, which brings about even positive physical changes. The opposite is also true. So if a person has a very negative approach to the body and disease, the negative thinking will start creating negative effects. And so even without taking any medication or undergoing any interventions, like even like operations, the person may continue to feel that he has the symptoms. And this, again, as I already mentioned, is related to the fear and other emotions that the person has because of past experiences. Another example is what happens when a person comes to the doctor to check blood pressure. And so then that anxiety itself in meeting a person who is dressed in a white coat itself can cause the blood pressure to go up. So this is another example of the mind-body relationship and interactions. And so we may not be just our physical bodies, and so there is a interaction between the mind and the body. And here where prayer comes in, and so that prayer has a positive effect, bringing about recovery, helps to reduce stress and enhancing immunity, increasing resilience. And so these persons are also advised relaxation techniques. So it may be meditation, yoga, light exercise, which has a beneficial effect. And so that brings us to the last topic, which is on faith and healing. And so we know that scripturally, so faith is a channel through which God's healing flows, and it is God's saving power and work. And here we do not acknowledge our own human achievements, but attribute it to the healing power of God. And that is also what was reflected in Jesus' healing ministry. So there was a restoration of creation through the revelation of God's kingdom, and that is then continued now through healers in the form of priests, healthcare professionals, caregivers who become instruments of God's love, compassion, and service. And this provides them with an inner strength, so builds up their faith, trust, grace, which helps them then participate in their suffering as a redemptive process. The community of faith also has a positive effect, and so those who pray with the person, visit the sick, accompanying them, the anointing of the sick, the sacrament of anointing of the sick, may not always guarantee a cure, but then it sometimes brings spiritual healing through reconciliation, forgiveness, inner peace. And so then it is a complementation to science, which restores the entire body, mind, body, and spirit. And so although medicines may treat, but it is God who heals. Time also heals. And there is this cooperation between faith, science, and then divine grace. While medicine aims to relieve pain and continue to preserve life, we can not always answer all the questions and about the mystery of suffering and death. And that is where these the two faith science meet, but both require each other. One cannot replace the other, but they deepen each other's meaning. And the healing, whether you believe in miracles or not, but to the person who is healed by a miracle, there is no doubt, and it changes their entire life. It has a transforming effect on their lives, and that reflects the love of the Creator. And so this, we need to acknowledge this as a mystery of the healing divine presence. So to conclude, so life is a composite of not just our genes, but a number of our processes, the interconnected organs in our body, which is a fine balance, as well as a goal-directed process. The sacredness and dignity of the human body begins right from the time of conception as a human person. As we have already seen, the near-death experiences challenges the boundaries between life, death, our mind, the consciousness, the body. And there are some who may believe that extrasensory perceptions are an illusion, but it also reveals how interconnected all our perception, our cognition, the consciousness, and biology are. And it reflects our search for a meaning in this life, even beyond, in this life and even beyond this material world. So all these experiences actually challenge and test the limits of our understanding through science, neuroscience, medicine. And each recovery that happens beyond our expectations, maybe miracles, reminds us that we are again at this edge of history where the known meets the unknown. And even we need to accept death and eternal rest also with humility. Life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived as it unfolds daily. With that, I will conclude. Thank you.
Dr. Ashish, thank you very much for that enlightening and inspiring talk. Truly, it gave us a sense of the mystery that is inherent in science. Because as we know from our religious studies, the mystery is not something which is opaque to us, but it is something in which the more you know, there is still an infinity that there is to know, and we realize that. I'm reminded of reading a news article this summer. There was a huge excitement that finally there is going to be a huge showdown and a decision between the two main theories that explain consciousness. One of them he was talking about the global neuronal workspace theory and the integrated information theory. However, what happened is at the end of that wide experiment, they concluded that still there is not enough information to make a decision, and what happened is the experimental results were contrary to the expectations. So the more you know, the more it seems mysterious, and that is very well reflected by your talk. And one talk is not enough for this. We feel, I certainly feel that we could continue to listen to you as you explore this subject. So we have 15 minutes for questions. We shall wind up the question and answer session at 7:30. So until then, the floor is open for questions.
Dr. Ashish, since you are sitting next to an engineer, and both of you, there is a combined thought that is many scientists are looking at. How do we download the consciousness and keep it in a hard disk or a drive and upload it to somebody else's body and that we continue living? What are those possibilities? Does the mind, is it related only to the brain, or does it go beyond somewhere else there? And a little bit more, I enjoyed the thing about extrasensory perception as well. Many strange things that we get, certain intuitions and things that are there. Please say a little bit more about that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so I haven't come across about the consciousness changing from person to person, but maybe it could be explained in the Indian philosophy of then in the afterlife. But maybe apart from science fiction, I don't have any explanation for how that is possible. Sorry, and the second question Father was regarding the extrasensory perception. Yeah, so this is to me it seems like you would put it down to just intuition, because there is no sensory input that is happening, but the person is still able to see things that are at a great distance away, or remember past events that they've not actually physically been there. So it reflects about the then it challenges our understanding of consciousness, because the consciousness requires all this sensory input to happen, and so how do we explain it? It's very challenging. uh, I don't know whether then again quantum physics would come in here, which would then explain that phenomena, and yeah, so that's where the engineers then would come in.
Wonderful presentation, Dr. Ashish. I would like to ask you that you said that for the near-death experiences, that when it's more than 5 minutes, I presume it was the clinically dead time you are telling. If it's more than 5 minutes, there is no medical explanation, right? And when I just Google, I find there are some cases like they are saying 30 minutes, 1 hour. Have you come across anything that is verifiable? And to that cases, if there is such a case where it is more than 30 minutes, such that they are clinically dead and then coming back, and then they are explaining these experiences. So right now, medical science does not have an explanation for that. Is that what we are saying?
Yes, exactly. So from my understanding also, if we correlate it with our physiological understanding, we can explain it maybe up to 3 to 4 minutes, maximum 5 minutes after death, which is the explanation that is given. But beyond that, I personally don't feel it's possible to explain. That becomes very challenging, and that's the mystery over here. But again, it brings in the concept of quantum physics again, so that it could very well then explain that the consciousness transcending time. So that is then the explanation that we would have.
That was the brain for 4 5 minutes we can revive. What about the other way? Brain dead, but the body is alive. No, brain dead person.
Yes, yes.
You can say something.
So that is referred to as a vegetative state. Okay, so it must have been the result of something like this cardiac arrest. So they must have been resuscitated at some time because of the heart stopping. And so it happens quite often, and it's then very unfortunate to see because after having revived them, then if they remain in that kind of a state where there is absolutely no bodily response, no verbal response, but their eyes are open and they are paralyzed, completely paralyzed. So that is the result of again clinical death with the residual damage to the brain, which would have definitely gone on beyond more than that window period of 3 to 4 minutes, ideally. And most of the experiences and the cases that they're talking about near-death experiences is all beyond this 5 minutes. That makes it even more mysterious and challenging. Yeah. And this doctor has mentioned about 1,000 cases, so it's a big number. We cannot deny the fact and the existence of it. some would put it down to just a miracle, but that's just a layman's way of explaining it. But I think then quantum physics is what would be the answer in this case. I don't know whether you would agree with that one.
Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Ashish. The near-death experiences mostly are like depends on the faith of the person. In other case, I've not heard of any experiences of like an atheist. What kind of experiences they have, if there is no any spiritual beliefs? Are there any records of near-death experiences of those people?
Yes, so as I was going through the net as well and listening to some videos, so there was one testimony of a Muslim boy who then gives his testimony of meeting Jesus. So I at least found, somebody who has some faith, but I have not come across atheists. But I think Father was mentioning at the beginning of the talk that even atheists also have the same experience. So it doesn't depend on the religious belief, it appears. The particular video I showed at the beginning of the talk, he was a Catholic, raised as a Catholic, but he doesn't go into too much detail about how much he's practicing, but definitely after this experience, he talks a lot more about it and about God and Jesus.
Given the biological basis of that experience which you talked about, technically we would expect atheists also to statistically have those similar experiences, no?
Yes. So atheists also will experience the same, according to me, although I have not heard and not searched probably more in detail, but they will have the same experiences.
Good evening, Dr. Ashish. Thank you for that very beautiful presentation. Recently, a few years ago, Michael Schumacher, he had an accident, a skiing accident. He was put in an induced coma. He's in this state of induced coma for about, I think, 13 years now. Does the body, do his organs also age? Because he was probably 46 at that time. So suppose he's resuscitated. Will he be 58 years old when he wakes up? And how long can he be kept in a state of induced coma? Because he obviously is very rich and the family has spent a lot of money to keep him in that state. So one is about the age of his body. If he resuscitates, what would he look like? And secondly, how long can he be kept in that state of induced coma?
Honestly, I may not have too much knowledge about the details of the induced coma, but I presume that aging should happen, but I am not sure of that answer.
I think we have around 5 minutes more, so I think there's time for at least 2 or 3 or even possibly 4 questions.
There have been people with accidents, and then certain parts of the brain may have been damaged. And yet, though we say right brain, left brain theories and all that, but they have also found that the brain can take on certain roles which were supposed to be attributed to particular parts, like the cerebrum or cerebellum. Does that happen? Is that scientifically proved that the brain can take on, other parts of the brain can also take on these duties?
And also neuroplasticity as well. So the brain has the ability then to develop new networks as well, but of course to a certain limit. And so that can happen with maybe regular exercise, through training, like even physiotherapy and various other inputs depending on what the deficits are. So there is definitely the possibility of not full recovery, but at least to a good extent. And so there is, at least when I was searching, so there is very specialized centers who then cater to treating only patients who recover from, who are in coma and are recovering to some extent, and with whatever hope they have, then they try a number of these measures.
Well, if I may ask a question, Dr. Ashish. Do you see in the near future the possibility of ever constructing any falsifiability test for this duality hypothesis regarding the mind and body? Yeah, because currently, is it at all possible to construct any test by which you can try to falsify it, or is it something which is completely non-falsifiable?
Not that I can think of, it would be difficult. Yes, because there is a definite, the mind-body interaction, and so I think it would be quite difficult to try to do that.
If there are no more questions, I think last chance. Anyone has any burning question?
There are minds which are conditioned with neurological stimuli to take decisions. So a lot of algorithms are made also to force us to take decisions. So he says free will, what we say is free will. I mean, it's not related to consciousness, but it's like some way we say free will. But there are experiments which say free will is not really free.
I think you're referring to the neural experiments by which first the impulse of action happens and then the impulse of the justification is recorded. So the rationalization happens after the... Okay. Once again, thank you, Dr. Ashish, for a very interesting session. Now I would like to invite Father Jayard to give the closing comments.
Just one or two observations. Before that, on a personal note, I'd like to thank Dr. Ashish, because when we discussed, we met a couple of times before this talk, and he said, I'm purely from medical world, first time exploring this kind of field. But from his presentation, from his reflection, we can see a lot of readings, reflections has gone behind. So thank you, Dr. Ashish. Yes, that was a wonderful thing. And Roland was asking about induced coma. I think many of our JD students have that when they go for the lectures. All right, not my lecture, huh? By the way. Yeah. And a lot of interesting things came up. This phantom, Father was asking, when the brain loses, suppose my hand, the area which is responsible for the hand, the other parts of the brain comes to help, complement like. It's called phantom experience. After my losing my hand also, my brain thinks there is a hand. And this is related to the bionic arm. And there is one Ramakrishnan, a great neuroscientist from Chennai. He has done quite a lot of research on that. How normally when there is an artificial limb, we cannot lift or something, we have to carry. But this artificial limb, by thinking, I can lift it. So the bionic arm, lot of researches are going on. And about the brain, it's really, really a fascinating thing. We are speaking about the brain with 100 billion neurons and each one 10,000 connections. It's just unimaginable. And in my opinion, we can never understand our brain as long as we use the brain in our head in order to study another brain. Because there will be some margin will be overlapping. So if at all we are able to reach a stage where we can study a brain without the use of a brain, perhaps we can understand. Till then, brain is the most complex thing in the whole of the universe. The whole of the universe, the brain is the most complex thing according to the brain. Because kidney cannot tell us that, right? So we need to be patient. We need to keep our interest, our enthusiasm more. And about the left brain, right brain, the two hemispheres, that's also very much interesting. And these two brains are well connected. The connections are thicker and better for female brain. That is why female brain is more of cognitively very active. Though there are some scientists don't accept that. The female and male brain, they are not completely different because we don't have any diseases affecting only the male brain or only the female brain. Not that way. But the cognitive activity is more for female brain. Some time ago, I gave a lecture on that here in Science and Religion. For example, XX chromosome female, XY chromosome male. XX chromosome, 1500, 3000 genes they have. Whereas XY, men have only 1500 plus 100 only they have, so 1600. So at least double the amount their cognitive capability is more. And they can easily store data, a lot of data. They can store data, they do store, and they have a lot of things to talk. That's why they keep talking. And men cannot talk. There may be some exceptions. Men cannot talk, and they think that women are just blabbering, going on chatterbox, etc. Now, once a woman was on the phone for a long time, and husband got irritated. 1 hour she is talking. When she came back, she asked, "Who is that on the phone for 1 hour you were talking?" "I don't know, some wrong number." Okay. So like that, the brain is really a great mystery. And as is pointed out, many things like a psychosomatic being and the extrasensory perception. We had a former rector, Pradeep Sekura. He used to say, this person, he has only the sixth sense already. All the other 5 senses failed, he said. So some people believe only in the extrasensory perception. But how does it really work? It's a mystery. Now, what's the difference between hallucination and illusion? Both are mysterious. Illusion and hallucination, what's the difference? Illusion is, suppose I think that you are listening to me as I talk, it's an illusion, right? Hallucination is, there is nobody in the hall, but still I imagine there are people, I give big lecture, that is hallucination. But both are beyond the real explanation. And the frontal lobe, how it is really connected, and there is a coordinating area which collects all the sense senses from different areas. You know, between the neurons, the signals, the neurons, they are going as a physical signal. When they cover the gap, they change into electrochemical. But how that happens, it's a big mystery. Why and how is a big mystery, we do not know. And this frontal lobe, it gets a full enlargement, full growth about 26 or 27 years. Till then it is growing, right? And for some people it may never grow to the completeness, we can make out. But generally it is 26, 27. That is why the neuroscientists say why the children, teenagers need to listen to their parents, elders, teachers. Because the frontal lobe is the area which is responsible to see the pros and cons of an action and make a decision which is not available for them. There's nothing wrong with them. That is how the nature proceeds. So if you tell children, no, religion tells you should obey your parents, or the Bible tells, or no, there is a custom, they may not be convinced. But if we tell that neuroscience tells, perhaps maybe they may be convinced why they should listen to their parents and so on. So like this, a lot of things, very interesting things. As Xavier said, one lecture is not enough. It's just only stimulating our own interest. And the one final comment would be about coma. You know, coma is a very interesting disease. Why? We do not know whether the coma will become a comma or a full stop. We do not know. It all depends. Recently, there was a real case happened in Kottayam. A pregnant lady, 4 or 5 months, she was pregnant, and she fell in the bathroom at home, and she went into coma. And the doctors kept in the hospital 1 month, tried to revive her, could not. Fortunately, the fetus in the womb, the lady, it was growing very well, so they were very happy. And finally, the doctor said, "You take home her, and let's see if everything goes on well. At the time of delivery, we bring her back." And the 9th month or so, they brought her back, and through cesarean, they took the baby out, and they were all surprised the baby's growth was very nice and normal. And they put the baby on the mother's body, and the baby was crying. All through, the lady was in coma. No, absolutely no reaction, no action, no pain, nothing, no movement. And the child was crying, lying on the mother's body. At one moment, the child pulled the little finger of the mother, and immediately the mother opened the eyes. It was so thrilling experience for everybody. The doctors were in fact angry with that baby. We had been trying for several months, we could not revive, and this little thing came, did nothing, only cried and brought her back. Probably the baby was telling, "Mommy, you come back. Without you, I cannot survive." It's really a great experience. And the doctor says, this is the moment where I see the signature of God. You see? And that is a final great thing. So, my dear friends, so we can go on talking about this and discussing about this. And our Science and Religion Forum, JD has this opportunity to reflect upon all these things apart from regular philosophy, regular theology, sociology, and missiology, etc. These are all touching our lives, touching out the very core. It helps our own spirituality. It helps us to help others, and it will be a great help in our mission too in future, right? Okay, so we need to integrate philosophy, theology, and this kind of extra input sessions and all. I'm very happy that we have come in large number. One final request: we start the session at 6 o'clock. Sometimes the parish priest waits for the people. So instead of 6 o'clock mass, he starts at 6:10, 6:15. Those who come early, they'll say, "Oh, this father always starts late." Then they will come 6:30. So it goes on. So we'll begin the session at 6. And of course, we have your own schedule and work, etc. So if you are interested, please come at time so that we have more time for the talks and discussion, etc. So we can help one another. So, okay, with that request, I thank you once again for Ashish and Savio also. And over to Vijay. Yes.
Thank you, dear Father. I hope you all have gained valuable knowledge and found this session fruitful. The end of one session is just the beginning of many more discoveries. I take this opportunity to thank our speaker of the day for his enlightening session, and also I express my gratitude to the moderator. Let us once again give them a round of applause. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Father Herman, the moderator of Inigo Southern, and Father Claudius, JD Treasurer, for their unconditional support. I also would like to thank JD Media Association for capturing the moment. A special note of thanks to all the audience for your active participation. Thank you one and all for making this session a success. The journey of knowledge never ends. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow also at 6 o'clock in the evening. Tomorrow we are going to explore another very interesting domain of ocean, the deep sea floor, biological mysteries and philosophical implication. And the speaker is our own director, Father Stephen Jayard. So stay curious, stay inspired, and keep exploring the marvelous world of science. Now let us rise for the JD anthem.
गाएंगे हम गीत तेरा, तू ही तो माता पिता, तू ही गुरु, मीत हमारा। नमन तुझे, सलाम तुझे, तू ज्ञान दीप हमारा। नमन तुझे, सलाम तुझे, तू ज्ञान दीप हमारा। तू ही तो देता विवेक दान, हमें विश्वास हमारा, विश्वास हमारा। जीवन में हर पल गाएंगे हम गीत तेरा, तू ही तो माता पिता, तू ही गुरु, मीत हमारा।
Thank you once again. Have a wonderful evening.